Allison Skewes. I am, I guess, the person behind Askew Pilates. That's my business. I was working for a studio until recently, and then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do my own thing.
Mhm.
So here I am, starting my own thing, which is
Nice.
a little weird, and I don't want to. I'm not scared, but I'm just like, oh, this is a lot of responsibility, like accounting and bookkeeping
Right.
and
All the other
taxes
skills. Yeah.
and like the legal stuff. And I haven't even started teaching classes yet, like to the public, or like virtually or whatever, because I've been
Hmm.
busy working on my webinar. Um, so it's a lot, and I didn't learn there are a lot of things I didn't learn in teacher training, and the that aspect of it is certainly one of them. I
Yes.
don't know how it was for you, if anyone ever said to you, like, oh, yeah, so you can teach on your own, but like,
Right.
here's this laundry list. I
Yeah,
don't,
it's interesting, because when I started off in personal training first, that was one of the modules that they taught us, and just the different models of how you can get paid, working for a big box, working as a contractor, working as a subcontractor, doing your own. So they gave us these different models, and at that point I was like, I think I want to be a subcontractor somewhere where I'm determining how much I get paid, but I'm not responsible for my overhead, and just found this kind of hybrid model, and I ran with that for almost 20 years. Um, and then yeah, but then I've moved into now owning like a micro business. So I'm in high octane training and therapy, and in that space, I have my business within their business. So that's kind of how I set it up.
okay, yeah, that's interesting. Do you have kind of like this sort of relationship where there's like a referral
Hmm.
kind of process, like they're like, ah, yeah, we'll go see Martin, or like you'll like, hey, go over here, or
Right? Yeah, got eyes on the business, and it's just a catalyst for other things, right? Like you have the space, and then it just draws in different business opportunities as well. It's really yeah, because I never figured I'd have like a bricks and mortar type space that I would just continue to just work as a subcontractor or a contractor. But this, like your business, this is like a COVID baby. It's like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? Let's give this a go, right?
yeah, I have to say I was so burnt out from working for other people, which I think is
Mm,
very common in our industry. And because I live in California, I live in the county that kind of shut down first, I'll say.
yes.
Um, and how that happened at the beginning of March is like, and I really think the tech companies were a huge part of this because they were
Okay.
telling their employees to stay home. And then I think the public health department was like, okay. So we've been shut down. I think my last day of working in a studio was the 17th of March.
Yes.
And I had been working, and I know everyone has different capacities for like work and like what's full time for them, but I had been
Yes.
working I was working about 20 hours a week at two different studios. I was teaching, 4 hours at a smaller studio, um, 16 hours at like large group classes.
Yes. Wow.
And I
Yeah.
was still and the group classes are, it's like theater, right? You
Yeah.
might not be necessarily performing, but you're like, let's do it. And then
Yeah. I
just
was gonna say you're in
managing.
front of a lot of bodies. Oh, that's exhausting.
Yeah, and managing kind of and just knowing how different people like kind of you get used to people, right? And you're like, well,
Hmm.
how are they going to react to this? Like, what can I do for them to make this more comfortable for them? This thing I want to try. But I was coming out of really my first year of, I will say, like my first. It had been over a year, but that where you kind of that's this like ramp up period,
Yes.
and I had subbed like I wasn't doing anything last summer.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, yeah, all my coworkers are going out of town. Like, I'll sub, like, I'll be a good person, a good coworker. And
Yes.
um, I went from teaching like 6 hours a week because I really need to ease myself into things. I went from teaching 6 hours a week to I just picked up some regular sub shifts, and then I just more and more because apparently nobody likes to sub.
Yes.
Um, and so I
We will
ended
talk
up
about that in a
teaching,
minute. Yes.
yeah, I taught over the summer, I taught 150 hours. And then like that's a lot.
Yeah.
And I by the time COVID happened, I was like, all right, cool, we're gonna be shut down for a few weeks. This is gonna be like a time for me to
Like vacation
decompress.
almost. Yeah.
Yeah, and it took me almost 2 months to like not calm down. I didn't feel stressed. Like I didn't feel it. It wasn't like having visible signs or like like I think in Cal like we're so used to like corporate job stress or hearing about
Yes.
that we don't realize how it manifests for us as Pilates teachers.
Right.
Um,
That's true.
and I think I was so stressed and I didn't even know it. And so I have had to take like I'll say like all of the COVID time so far and actually think about what I want to do to never feel like that again.
That's good. Allison, actually, my screen's actually still frozen as much as everyone can
Oh,
see you. Isn't that weird? I was waiting for
yeah.
it to click over and it never did.
Do you want me
Is
to jump out and come back in?
Yeah, let's do that and see how
Okay.
that see if that makes a difference.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. Here we go.
Okay, I'm gonna come back in. How's it going, Maria? Maria Earl and Joseph, Kurt Charles, how you doing? Tara Rose, Tracy, you got some awesome comments there. That's a great that first shirt talked about marketing and business, even took headshots and marketing photos for our website. I wish that was part of everyone's programming. That's crazy. Getting Allison back in here.
Well, that
Okay.
does.
That's so much better.
Hold on. Is that my? Hold on. Did my camera flip somehow when I accepted
It
that?
must have. Can you reverse the camera?
Oh my God.
Hey, there you
I'm like, what's wrong with my screen?
go.
That's just my living room. That's my
Okay,
TV.
thanks for
Yeah,
the
I'm like,
tour. Yeah.
yeah, it looks real great in here right now. I tell you, after being home for all these months, you'd think I
Mhm.
would have gotten it together.
Yeah,
No.
but not. But you were
Yeah.
talking about those hours, and it's not even necessarily the number of hours that you worked, it's the number of people that you're in front of, that you're performing for, that you're trying to help, that like me, it's not like you're just like reciting exercise and getting them to move. Like you actually care about the bodies that you're in front of. So that's like a whole another level of energy that you're putting out there.
Yeah, it's like a level. So this is kind of gonna tie right in. I think I'm just gonna jump into like weight bias and like
Jump.
all of this. So you spoke about reclaiming a word, and I use the word fat to describe myself, and
Okay.
it's legitimately just a descriptor for me. However, if someone yells something at me across the street using the word fat, it's not a descriptor, right? It's being
Hmm.
used as a weapon. But anyway, as a fat fitness instructor, as a fat Pilates teacher, I felt I had to work harder
Hmm.
than my straight size colleagues to have people coming to my class in the first place and to
Yes.
not and to keep people coming to my class. And there would be times, especially I remember my first day teaching mat class. It was at a yoga studio,
Hmm.
and the teacher before me, she was a lovely person, and she was very, I would say, very. She looked like a Pilates teacher, and I think we
Okay.
we all know what I mean with that, like shorthand. And when I showed up to teach the class, I got this like one, like it was just this total like once over. Like the eyes drop down, the eyes come back up, and it's
Hmm.
like their opinion has been it's done. And I never saw them in my mat class again. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't think that, I mean, I'm sure there's an extent where we've all experienced something like that as
Hmm.
teachers, but when you're in a larger body, it happens a lot.
Yes.
Um, and so I think that like that contributed certainly to me being overwhelmed without
Yes.
necessarily knowing um, that it was happening. So,
That's an
um,
interesting point. Yeah. The
uh,
sorry, please go.
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, have you ever like? I mean, I think you talked earlier this year about, because you come from like fitness, right? You had talked earlier this year about like you were like, oh, the sleeve, it's not so tight. Like my muscles aren't like they're no longer where they used to be. Did you have you ever felt, I don't know, sort of judged for being smaller, I'll say, or was it just self-judgment because you were
That's
still fit looking?
well, that's a good question, and it wasn't necessarily that was my own internal message, but I do identify with your saying of someone looking at you and making an assumption about your ability, generally speaking, right? And I'm sure that happens in so many different contexts. For me, coming from a place of looking fit, someone may look at me and think, well, he wouldn't know how to work with a bigger body because he's never been there. He won't have compassion. He's probably going to be one of those people who are going to say, well, if you just ate this, you'd be fine, or if you just did this, you'd be fine, or you know what I mean? Like, so it's I have talked about that in the past too. Is that in the same way that anybody gets those prejudgments, I get that because there's a perception that I'm going to be a certain way because I'm straight, that I'm not going to be compassionate towards gay people, that I'm fit, that I'm not going to be compassionate towards heavier people, that I'm this, that I'm not going to be compassionate towards that. So then
Yeah.
I find that there's times that I'm putting forth so much energy to make sure that my words are on point and that my cues are on point and things that we should be doing anyways, but I'm starting from a negative. And we didn't even get into skin tone, right? But I mean,
Yeah.
when I'm starting here and then you've already put me down here and then I'm clawing to come back up to here and then teach you, yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah, it's one of the things I talk about, or I'm like that I'm definitely including in my webinar, is talking kind of about how there's a lot of talk on
Hmm.
bias because I think we need to understand it at the most basic level if we
Yes.
want to confront our
Hmm.
biases. And I'm not, we all have biases, right? We
Yes.
all, almost all of us, like we have to, like, talk about like bias, privilege,
Yes.
intersectionality, like
Yes.
internalized bias, because we have to understand like where we fall on a
Yes.
scale,
Hmm.
and to like what extent we either have privilege or we don't have privilege. And so
Hmm.
like for me, yes, I'm in a larger body, so like I guess we can like kind of say, well, there's like a marginalization right there. However, I'm also white,
Hmm.
right? And so like I understand like the intersectionality of that privilege there. And then when you look at like marginalization in the, I will say in like the health at every size, they're generally, it's like a generally chill community. But when you look at like kind of fat activism,
Hmm.
and kind of the fat acceptance spheres, I also want people to understand that I am in a smaller body. Like, and I, like the human mind, I think, loves to organize.
Yes, it
We
does.
love to organize and categorize,
Categorize.
and
Yep.
it's just this system. But in that, even though I might have not have privilege necessarily in like a fitness sphere within like the fat community. I do have privilege because I can still find clothes that fit me, right? And
I follow
so
you.
kind of understanding all of these things like
Hmm.
is important. And I know that's kind of like tangent on what
It
you're
no,
talking
actually,
about. I'm like, here I go.
it's totally relevant because I mean, think about like even skin tone bias, right? Like even in the Black community, my sister who is an actress and a musician, she would go up for audition, and because and then she'd see a light skinned Black girl walk in the room, and she's like, she's got the role because her skin's lighter than mine, right? Like, so if in the fat world, people look at you like you barely fit in the room because you can still buy your clothes, that you know what I mean, that sort of thing. Then that's the same kind of thing. We all go through it somewhere, and actually, I was going to say this earlier about me and how I get perceived. When I was talking with Marimba about this, she put it out this way. It's like, I am the bully. I'm the jock in high school that picked on you, perception block category, right? So if I'm that person, then you don't want to hear what I have to say about sensitivity to a weight bias because I'm probably the same person who tease you and cause you to just have no friends in high school because you were in the band while I was on the football team, sort of thing, right? So that gets projected and overcompensated in the way that I teach because I see that in a way that people look at you or talk to you or whatever it is, and then you're just, okay, so I have to start from a negative and prove myself and then go.
Yeah, there were times when I wondered if I was like even being biased in my own teaching, not against like if someone super athletic came into my class and nothing was hard for them,
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, like here it goes, like
Yeah.
you're gonna get it now, and like
Hmm.
like is that bias?
Yes.
Is it like I don't know, and like to what extent is that just me feeling like salty as a teacher or as a human? Like where where is that, right? Like,
Yes.
and I don't know. I think we all need to just spend some time just like pausing for a minute and being like,
Hmm.
okay, so if I've had like these life experiences that have been negative to this point,
Right.
and someone comes into my studio space where I'm teaching, and like, is there going to be this like they were my oppressor in high school moment where you're just like, oh, you're gonna get it now, like you
Yes.
think
Yeah.
I can't teach, or like you think I'm gonna be one way, and it's just interesting to think about. And
Hmm.
I don't know, it's like, to what level though is this self introspection like like
Ad nauseum.
no longer serving you though?
Right. Yeah.
And it's just such a weird, I don't know why I feel like I've always been kind of like introspective, and I've always taken closer looks at things,
Yes.
and there are also downsides to that. Right?
Well,
Like,
absolutely. But also, think of it like this too. Like Nikki said, we all have biases, right? So let's start there. We all have a bias. And I was talking with someone this morning about that. And like I unapologetically have some biases that I know are part of who I am. We need to be aware of them. And what do we do with them is the question, not do we have them. If we have a bias, like no, we all have biases. There's certain
we
things
all
that we
do.
are biased. And I'll give you an example just for the audience. This is my bias. I have among the many, I'm sure. This is the one I'm very, very aware of. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. Competency bias. If I go take a class and I watch you demonstrate an exercise and don't think that you really can do the exercise or could finish the workout, I'm out. It doesn't matter what you look like. You can be big, small, whatever the case is. If you're demonstrating how to throw a punch and you can't throw a punch, I don't want to hear what anything else you have to say. I'll do my own thing because I want to see that you have competence in what you're trying to teach me. If you have a high level of competence, I will follow you. I'll respect you. I want to learn from you. If your competence is the same as me, I'll still learn from you. You're doing your best. If you are pretending to be something that you're not, I'm out. That's my competency bias. So I'm looking at someone right out of the gate. And if you were teaching my Pilates class and you have amazing cues and you haven't even got on before, but you're just talking, and I said, okay, she knows her stuff. She studied. I'm there. I'm all yours. If the first few minutes I realize that you really aren't committed to learning and you're holding a coffee the whole time and you don't have a professionalism about what you're doing in that moment, then I'm out.
You're perched on the edge of the reformer, sipping your Starbucks, and
Right.
you're like, yeah, okay, now go ahead and lift your leg. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. So that's my
that's
competency
my
bias.
I have a bias towards that too. Like I
Right.
think, and I don't know if that is because I'm a Pilates instructor as well. So if it's
Mm-hmm.
like if I'm taking a class in the before times when I was taking a class, I'd be like,
Yes.
this isn't even a matter of like, well, I don't like how they cued that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
No, no.
matter of like, okay, I can't even think of examples,
Yeah.
like,
That's that's a
but
real tongue-in-cheek example too, everybody. Like I'm just like
yeah,
that is really tongue-in-cheek to say like a competency bias because we always want someone who's like we want to look up
competent.
to somebody. We want someone to be our hero. But yeah, and being a business owner and all those different things. So you look at those things. So how professional are they? How competent are they? What are they? So, but if you can use it with that example of competency, it's the same thing that comes to our skin tone, or their background or their lineage, or like you can go anywhere with that. So I think that we don't need to get stuck in those biases and sit in the room and just keep doing Harvard implicit biases, bias testing all day. But we need to get a sense of what, where we're at, be aware of it, and how do we pivot from that? So I'm going to read Tara's comment here.
And that's a good comment. I was gonna say that's worth reading because it's true. I
Okay, so
can't do
here,
everything.
same except as someone with physical disabilities, not so much for the demo example. Some people might not be able to do it anymore injury except they could do it really well in the past. Yeah. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And that all ties into it, right? So I mean, and I'm being totally honest. So let's say that is the case where they have an injury and they can't demonstrate anymore. How have they compensated? Okay, so I can't get down and do that. Like how sharp are they? If the person has super sharp verbal cues, I'm still there. How have we pivoted? It's not a question of what your bias is. The question is, how have you learned? What have you done since you learned that this is your bias?
Yeah. I I think we have to understand.
Phone down when you're teaching. Someone else
Yeah.
put a comment there.
Yeah,
Sorry.
phone down when you're teaching. I'm like, okay, like when someone's teaching and I'm like, they're like, just let me get this in there. It's like, okay, not important. So you're like, what am I doing? Like, am I gonna eat it on the reformer? Like, am I gonna fall? And
Yeah.
eat it? Like, that's important, not what's
Mm-hmm.
texting you, not what you're trying to queue up on Spotify to listen to while you're here in the studio. The what we do with it is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I in terms of Pilates and what we do with weight bias, for example,
Yes.
is there's just this huge shift I think has to happen. And it has to happen from the organization. So it has to happen from the people up top,
Mm-hmm.
equipment manufacturers
Yes.
are professional organization because
Mm-hmm. Yes.
you okay.
Separate conversation. Yes.
Yeah, that's a different conversation. Are professional organizations in as much as they exist. It has it has to happen there, and then it has to happen with individual teachers, individual studio owners. It has to happen on so many levels, and I don't care. They don't have to fire simultaneously. Like they don't both have to happen at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
because change really it change starts small. And
Yes.
I'm an impatient person, and so I'm like, where is it? I need it now. I need it
Mm-hmm.
now. Like this has to happen now. But when we're looking at institutions, who are starting to wake up to their own biases.
Yes.
Like there's a level where change will happen slowly. Like, and I
Hmm.
think with weight bias, it's one of those cases, right?
Yes.
Where we're like, okay, let's examine and then let's work to make long lasting change versus like tokenizing fat bodies, like
Hmm.
black bodies.
Hmm.
Um, you know, like I'm here for the long lasting change
Yes.
versus like this kind of flash in the pan.
Right.
We're trying to stay
Trendy.
culturally, yeah, we're trying to stay culturally relevant,
Right.
so we're going to be inclusive
Hmm.
type of change. Um, and I think like we need to understand like if we're cueing something, like is this a bias cue?
Right. Let's explore that a little bit more. Just if we can just dive deep on that, because I love that your workshop's coming up and you're going to explore this. Can you talk more to bias or non-bias cues, please?
Yes. So, um, before this is a story from before I became a teacher, before I was going through teacher training, and I didn't. I was still, I think, dealing with a lot of internalized fat phobia or internalized weight bias, which is basically where I, as a person in a larger body, thought I had to, or I was less deserving of like basic human decency in a way because
Mm,
I was fat or I am
yeah.
fat. And I was kind of, I would say it was like kind of waking up to like diet culture and like healthism and like all of these things. But this would be maybe, I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 years ago maybe. And the teacher was cueing side lying work.
Okay.
Um, and we've all probably heard the term like mouse house or like try not to crush the ladybug between your waist and the mat, right?
Okay.
Like
Yes.
these like super negative space cues. And
Hmm.
I can't remember like exactly what the teacher had said, but I remember after class being like, yeah, so my side touches the mat. Like, what am I like? What's up? Because, like, am I doing it wrong? Which is like
Right.
doing it wrong is a whole nother thing. But it's like if my physical flesh is touching the mat and you're saying there should be space between the mat and my body, that in and of itself is bias in a cue
Yes.
because you're setting someone up in a larger body to think that they're either doing it wrong or they can't, or like, or maybe they're like just can't do that exercise because their like waist is touching the mat.
Yes.
When there are so many different ways to cue that, like, so for example, I don't even talk about where your like your body is.
Hmm.
Right? I'm just like, hey, like think about your bones. I'm always telling
Yes.
people, I'm like, touch yourself, like in a non-creepy manner, but I'm like, poke your hips, like
Yes.
like poke your bones, like think about where they are, find them, and
Yes.
like in sideline work, it's like, are your hip bones on top of each other?
Mm.
Are you shifted back? Are you shifted forward? What about your shoulders, right? And
Yes.
like
Skeletal cues.
skeletal cues versus I call them negative space cues.
Okay.
And yeah,
Negative space cues.
like
Yeah.
this happens in neutral pelvis as well. Where like if you say like, oh, it should feel like, or like there should be a little bit of light shining through
Hmm.
under the mat. Like if you're in neutral pelvis, which the size of someone's butt's gonna totally affect like or just their tissue distribution,
Yes.
right?
Right.
Like and so it's cues like that that people might not realize
Hmm.
are sort of like loaded when it comes to people in larger bodies.
So now, also, would you say that like people, teachers were more guilty of doing that in teaching a group setting where they're just using generic cues, or is that something that you find happens in one-on-one settings as well? Because that sounds like more like a generic, like I would say, being lazy as a teacher. So I'm telling everyone, scoop up,
Yeah.
find that light between your reach up, and then like you're just kind of just going through your song and dance.
I think that I don't want to say it's like group teaching laziness because I have heard, like, I think it's just a lack of education because I have overheard similar cues in privates and like
Mhm.
maybe it's like a lack of like teaching, like maybe they're like a fresh teacher
Okay.
relatively. Like maybe they've been teaching like, less than like 2 years. Like how do we even define
It's just, well, if you've never
like
seen that
yeah,
body type before,
yeah,
right? Like you could be teaching for
yeah,
15 years and never have people come in that are a different demographic than X demographic. So obviously you're ignorant to those cues.
yeah, and it's not even cues. I remember so I was subbing at a studio. I didn't normally, it was in this, same thing, but I didn't usually teach there regularly, same studio owners though. And there were some people in larger bodies in the class. And like, based on how they were moving in class, I was like, cool, like, I think they've been coming a while, which is fine. But there were things they didn't do, like the spring bar.
Yes.
The
Hmm.
spring bar, they didn't move it out. And I was like, they look like they look very uncomfortable, right?
Hmm.
Like and if they've been coming, like how has no teacher? Because this is what the teacher did for me, right? Like when I had been coming for a little while, like it was a different teacher than I usually took, and she moved the spring bar out, and I was like, all of a sudden, I was like, oh dang, my spine has somewhere to go, right? Like
Yes, yes.
when I think back on it, it's like, whoa, there's length there now because like my
Hmm.
knees aren't up in my face, or at least that's what it felt like.
Yes.
And whenever I would teach someone in a larger body and I didn't see them like move the spring bar out, that was usually the first thing I did where I was like, hey, I
Yes.
actually want you to try this. And you in some ways you almost can't even phrase it like a question,
Hmm.
which I encourage a lot of autonomy in my teaching and like
Yes.
taking responsibility for yourself, right?
Hmm.
But when you're dealing, and this is a generality because not everybody in a larger body is going to have this mindset, but I think historically, when you've been told that you don't have value unless you're actively working on shrinking yourself or you've shrunk yourself, right?
Right, right.
You don't feel necessarily like you may not feel like you know your body, right? Especially if you've been like hardcore dieting and like ignoring your body.
Yes.
Um, I guess we might need an additional
Yes,
hour.
I think we might. Yes.
Um,
I
but if you've
budgeted
been,
for that, by the way. So,
oh,
yes.
okay, wow.
Yes.
But okay, if you've been hardcore dieting and you think your body has not a lot of value, or you yourself might not have a lot of value, um, if a teacher says like, and you're accustomed to not being an inconvenience,
Hmm.
if a teacher says, oh,
Yes.
would you like to try this? You might be more comfortable. You're probably gonna be like, no, I'm good,
No, I'm
thanks.
fine.
Like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
right.
like no, I'm good. I'm actually really comfortable. Um, and so where does that kind of leave us, right? And
Hmm.
I think especially in the case of someone who's new
Yes.
and in a larger body, I think sometimes it's like, let's just do this. Well, like I'm using my like power as a teacher. We're gonna do this and we're gonna see how this feels. And if this is uncomfortable, like if this
Yes.
is truly uncomfortable, like let me know. But it's like when you go to the optometrist, I don't know if you wear glasses or contacts or whatever, but like where they're like A or B, like two or three, two
Yes.
or three. Like, let me show you these two things again. Let's just like fine tune this.
Yes.
And it's just things like that that really matter. And I
Hmm.
Michelle, did you talk about your
I know.
upcoming webinar? I am
This is the
totally
plug,
talking.
right?
You're like,
Yes.
this is all of it. Like, this is
Yes.
all of the webinar. But
Mm,
I remember when I was going through teacher training, I was super lucky and I found a used reformer on Craigslist.
mhm.
And I was like, yes, now I don't have to pay to rent the studio space. And I can have my friends who are free come over to my house and I can practice, teach, and get my hours
Yes.
whenever. And I did not learn in teacher training about different reformers.
Hmm.
I mean, I knew there were different ones,
Right,
right?
right, right.
But like nobody was like, oh, hey, dimensions matter and not just the footprint of the reformer. And so
Yes.
I bought this reformer and the carriage, it was non-adjustable. It was an Allegro, right?
Mhm.
Melon's Body Allegro. And my friend Jen comes over. She's in a larger body. She, like, bless her for being so, like, to this day, anyone who put up with my practice teaching, I'm like, you get free Pilates for life.
I'm
Like,
sure
come
all of
over.
us, we all cringe at how we used to teach people, right?
Yeah, I'm like,
Ooh,
oh,
that was, ooh,
so I
yeah.
actually hurt my husband
Oh
accidentally.
no.
So okay, nothing like super bad, but he might disagree. So
Right.
he's an
He's not
engineer.
on this, right? Okay.
Yeah, he's asleep still. I told him, I was like, I don't know if you heard earlier, my cat was like acting like she was dying, and I texted him like, let her in, please, let her into the bedroom. But anyway, so he's an engineer,
Hmm.
right? So he spends a lot of time at a computer, and I mean, maybe this is why we just don't work with our partners in general. But I had like, we were at home, and I was like, let's do, like, will you let me practice teach you? And he was like, yeah, fine. And I understand sequencing a little better now and maybe what's appropriate for someone and what's not appropriate for someone. And I
Yes.
put his little, like, his like engineer body, his like, I think we all know what I'm talking about. I'm not body shaming y'all engineers because I spend a lot of time at a computer too. But I put him on the short box and we did like the short box stuff, like
Yes.
the half rollbacks. Um, I I probably was like, hey, if your neck is bothering you, like put your hands behind your head, but like
Mhm.
very different. And then the next day, he like could not turn his head. He was like, oh my
Oh
God, my neck.
no.
And I'm laughing. Like you guys are probably like, what the lady?
This poor guy.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, I think it was like 6 weeks into teacher training. Like, you know what I mean? Like I was like, here I go. I'm gonna
Yeah.
practice teach you. And to this day, I'm like, hey, like we're home alone. Like, you want to do this Pilates thing? Like, I got this report. Yeah, and he's like, I just ate. I don't really want to lie
Oh,
down. And so
you
it's so
scarred him
funny.
for life.
I think in a way I probably did scar him for life. But there were a few times when he would come with, like, if I had a day off, like, because, like, the studio I worked at, I will say they were kind of generous, and, like, our partners got, like, 4 free classes a month.
Okay.
And so I would take him, like, there was, right before COVID, we started going to class together. And he could not be on the reformer next to me. I was like, I can't. I was like, go, like you go down there, opposite corner of the room. But I think he was starting to come out of it. But yeah, like there was some scarring, there was some emotional wounding there that
Yes.
happened.
Yes.
But I can't. I don't know. I think we all have, and you've talked about this before too, where you're like, I don't teach my wife Pilates.
No, no, I do teach her. We've
Oh,
battled it
okay.
out. Yeah, she's on the thread. I teach her. We've not to say we haven't fought through that, or there hasn't been tears, or we duke it
The
out from
murder
time to time.
eyes where you're like, why are you doing this to
Yeah,
me?
I can't like there's one or two times that like fresh out of a teaching class I had to go on onto these core conversations, and we talked about you know just the sense of it's a kind of separate conversation, but like you perceive what they can do and what they can't do, and then you almost want it for them more than they want it for themselves, or they're maybe like she said, like that scoop, like your scoop is not my scoop, so my cues may have been offensive to her, or like there's
Yeah,
like
just
we're as a couple, you're navigating all these different things, and as a, the reality is that like we joke about like scarring him for life, but at least it was your husband. Like, I mean, at least you're gonna go out
Oh,
into the rest of the world, and now you know what not to say to other people who can sue you for saying that sort of like,
yeah, I think it's so funny because when you're teaching, and you talk about this with Gwen, where you did like I think you did like premarital counseling,
Mhm.
um, and you're like, yeah, everyone comes in and they're like,
All
the
rosy
the
and happy,
romance, yeah, the
optimistic. Yeah.
romance is in the air, and they're like, nothing's ever gonna go wrong. But I think, yeah, when you're teaching your partner, and like you've been married for a while, like we've been married for 6 years.
Ouch.
Oh wow. Yeah, I'm like, oof. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, we started dating in 2011. So we moved in like 6 months after that together. So
Mhm.
we've been together a while.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's always that kind of like the relationship dynamic too that when you're
Familiarity
teaching.
breeds contempt is the phrase.
Oh yeah, I'm like I don't know. I went from him being at work all the time, like I think everyone's navigating their relationship and COVID, but like I
Yes.
went from having a lot of time at home. Oh yeah, it's 2020. Yeah, 5 years, 2020 doesn't count. Like,
Right.
but
Too funny.
yeah, when you go from being home alone or being on your own schedule
Yes.
a lot, and then like I really appreciate my alone time where I'm just like, and
You
then I'm
danced
like,
around that. Yes.
yeah, so I'm like, and like I have and it's like there's nowhere to hide in our house. Like, I'm like, we live in the Bay Area. Like, I live in a pretty big house by Bay Area standards, I guess. But like, it's single story.
Yes.
So like, at least with like 2 stories, you're like, okay, I'm gonna go
I'll
hide
be over
upstairs
there
right
in
now.
the
But
corner.
I'm like gonna go like create this little cave. We don't really have like a big yard, like right. So I'm gonna joke. Like it's real, and like he's in meetings all the time and I'm like, you are so loud,
Yeah. It's
like I
funny.
you are so loud, like the doors, we live like, I don't know if houses are like built better in Canada, but like our doors here are like hollow,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what is our walls insulated with like spit wads, like what, like what is like why is this house so loud?
Too funny.
But like just navigating being home with someone now, 8 9 months, I think he's been home because he stopped going to work 2 weeks or about a week
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
I think it was 2 weeks before the official Santa Clara County shutdown. So yeah, like, just what do you do? But like we on Tuesday nights. This is kind of funny. We on a whim, I told him I was like I'm gonna start strength training with this coach.
Mhm.
She doesn't charge more for duets. I'm gonna pay for it anyway, so you can join me if you want. And this is how we call it, our Tuesday night date night, where
Yes.
we like mess around with kettlebells together.
That's like Alex and I. We have our Saturday morning boxing date.
Oh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of nice actually,
Yeah,
in that
totally.
it's not
Not boxing each other,
Pilates.
just for the record.
Yeah, yeah, not boxing each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be crucial.
Yes. Might be
Yeah,
therapeutic, but
where you're like, I'm gonna, yeah,
yeah.
like I don't know. It's just nice to have something with him that's actually not Pilates. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
neither, and we started doing it at the same time. So
Mhm.
it's not mine and it's not his. It feels, and this
Right.
sounds so weird, but it feels like it's ours.
That's good.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of nice, like watching him. Like I will say I'm really competitive. Just like maybe not.
It's so
I'm like,
funny.
I'm like,
Um,
oh, you're 53 pounds. I can squat with that 53-pound bell. Like, let me one up
yes.
you. I don't know why I'm like this.
You're just wired that way. That's all. It's all good. And it's so funny, right? Like when we have these conversations, like for everyone who's watching, is like, I thought you guys were gonna be talking about like weight bias or Pilates or something. Why are you guys off on this tangent? I love these tangents because this is who we are. This is the person behind the brand. This is how you do life. This is how I do life. And I think that we get away from that because we're trying to put out these perfect images and these perfect perceptions of who we are and how we do things. And the reality is that we have so many different facets to who we are. And that's just kind of a segue into what Michelle was saying on one of her posts just recently, is that we are more than just Pilates instructors. We are more than just fitness professionals or dancers or whatever. We have so many different hats, so many different capes that we wear. You are a wife, you are an instructor, you maybe, who knows, 5 years from now, you may be doing kettlebell classes and doing kettlebell workshops, right? So,
Yeah.
and
No, it's true, but I don't think you can ever compartmentalize who you are. So like who you are as a person informs who you are as a teacher.
yes.
Your life experience and things you've experienced in your life, whatever they may be, they
Hmm.
impact who
Hmm.
you are.
Yes.
And it's, I think that to an extent, recently, and especially Western culture, there's been this, and I guess it depends. So like what Western culture you're talking about, right?
Hmm.
I lived in Germany, and I think there's a line there that will never be crossed between the professional and the business life.
Yes.
Um, but it's like there's this blurring that's happening of like, and it's not, I don't think it's a negative,
No.
of
Right.
who we are in our personal lives and how it informs how we
Yes.
are in our professional lives.
Right. Can you
Because
guys put that quote in the comment section? Because I missed it. Like, they're like, yes, write that quote down. Like, what was it
yeah,
resonated with everyone what you just said there a minute ago. If you guys could put it back in the comment section what that quote was, that'd be amazing, please.
yeah, I think it, yeah. Write this quote down. Yeah, I think it's how who we are as a person informs who we are as a teacher,
Yes.
probably.
Yeah.
Um, but it's true.
Hmm.
And I especially, I think especially in, at least with, you asked me to think about who my ideal client was. And if I think about who my ideal client is, it is someone who wants to work with someone who like me, right? Obviously, it's I think it's like dating,
Hmm.
right? Like I'm like, it's not just who, does my availability work with your availability? It's like, do we connect on this level
Yes.
where we get each other, right?
Yes. Right.
And I want to work with someone who is like, it's like, oh, what did you do this weekend? And I'm like, I sat on the couch and I watched Netflix and I used my sourdough starter to make some whatever, right? Like
Right.
where we can kind of talk about life. And
Right.
I think that also has to do with, maybe I'll call it like this conscious consumerism wave that's happening,
Hmm.
where we want to, if we're going to spend our money, we want to spend our money with, or like on things that are on businesses that are owned by people with like-minded
Yes.
values.
Hmm.
And that that's huge, right? Where it's no longer just like in the vein of Pilates. Well, it's like no longer just like, well, I want to do Pilates. I just want to do Pilates. Like, I think it needs to be, well, like, I want to do Pilates with
Hmm.
this
With that
person,
person. Yeah.
not, again, outside of their availability, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
have
absolutely.
you, like, have you experienced this in your own life? Like, kind of, yeah, like conscious consumerism, or like, I don't know what to call it, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I get consciously or unconsciously, yes, right? Like you want to support people who think the same way you are or have the same beliefs or whatever. I was going to say that the reverse of that too, right? Like there's people who choose not to put out there what their personal life looks like. Like you just like we just joked about, our spouses and then doing, playing with them, so to speak, and all those different things. There's other people who would just keep that whole world separate. This is my Pilates page. You're going to see me doing exercises. You're going to see me teach people exercises. You're going to see cute little Pilates quotes, and that's it. Whereas I will post pictures of my kids, pictures of my wife, pictures of my blended family. I'll talk about having a divorce. I'll talk about the fact that I have a vintage car, like whatever it is. I'll put stuff out there because I want people to connect and identify with me, so that our relationship and our working relationship is more than just showing up for an appointment. It's a lot harder to leave a friend than it is to leave your Pilates teacher.
Yeah.
Right. So it just lends to your business if you're continuing this journey, fitness journey with people through each stage of their life. Right. So
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I love it when you post about your car, actually, and like the care you give to your car. Like I'm just like, that's like a routine. Like that is like a ritual. You know what I mean? Like, and just like, I always admire those like types of things, because for a really long time, I wouldn't say that I had like purposeful routines like that. I mean, everyone kind of will settle, they'll like kind of habituate, and they're like, okay, like here's my, like I wake up, I make my coffee, but like
an intentional
like a routine, like something intentional. And I think it's really cool to kind of, like wash your car, like wax your car, like make sure like, I don't know, I'm sure your kids ride in the car, but like make sure like the kid cruft, like you're like, all right, let me get these crumbs, like here's a pair of socks, I don't know how they got there, let me like take these out, I think it's important. And because you had talked about how I think your dad had kind of modeled this behavior for you, right? With the caring of the car. And then in your conversation with Gwen, she had talked about how her mom had modeled self-care.
Yes.
And we may not always realize the things our parents are modeling for us. That's okay. I'm not
it's
laughing
all part
at that.
of it. No, it's that ritual. But like you're on that. You're on it exactly.
Yeah, when you've had things modeled for you, positive or negative, and you might not realize it, like that's another thing that impacts who you are as a teacher.
Yes.
I think I grew up, and I'm sure I'm like, may my mother never find my Instagram. Like, not because I'm about to like, she's like, I believe that yes, our parents do the best they can have done. Could have had like a textbook, like wonderful childhood, right? Like the Barbies or whatever you were into. I had like a lot of Barbies, the thing, right? But I grew up watching my mom is like a lifetime Weight Watcher member, right? Like my Nana went to Weight Watchers. Like I remember my other grandma, FYI, she lived until she was like 92, and she had recovered from, like, she had colon cancer, and she was like fine. You know what I mean? Like she had like gotten that taken care of. I remember watching her do a mail order diet before my cousin's wedding, and like, and I'm like, in retrospect, I'm thinking like, lady, like, I'm like, grandma, you were like in your like late 80s, early 90s. You love chocolate. Like, just let that wash over your soul. Like, you don't need like these like puffed cardboard chips. Right? Like, you have lived a long life. Just eat the damn chocolate. Like just watch it, like realizing how you've maybe internalized things like that you've watched your parents do or not do is huge. And like, I really think, and I talk about this with my sister, like my sister and I chat once a week about like diet culture and like growing up, and like, and sometimes we'll just text each other and we'll be like, hey, remember that time like mom said this, or like mom did this, and it's not like, and my mom, I have a great relationship with my mom. Like, we talk, like I got my love of gardening from her, but like I also have to acknowledge
That's where those
that like
messages come
I
from.
was 16 when I went to Weight Watchers the first time.
Yes.
And I think we also don't look at like we talk like sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about like what's healthy, what's not healthy.
Hmm.
And I never learned how to like I wouldn't say I've learned how to intuitively eat because of the diet culture that was built up in my household.
Yes.
I don't it's like we didn't have treats.
Hmm.
So like what's a cookie? I don't know. Cookies are bad for you. You go to grandma's,
Yes.
grandma's got like 500 cookies. You're here for the weekend, eat all the damn cookies because you don't have cookies at your house,
Right.
right? And so it's like when you live in this kind of, at least for me, and I'm
Yeah.
not, obviously I'm not a therapist, and I'm like not qualified to talk about like eating disorders or disordered eating or like
Right.
any of
Right.
that,
Right.
but like recognizing that I might have learned disordered eating patterns
Hmm.
because someone in my household was chasing this ideal of thin
Yes.
as equal to healthy.
Hmm. It impacts it massively. And
Oh, yeah.
the parent, like the line I always say in parenting is that there's more things that are caught than taught, right? And in parenting, so your parents may not have said to you, when you turn 16, you're going to Weight Watchers because I've been watching you for the last 4 years. But you saw that culture being in the house, so you figured that's the logical step for me, and that's caught, that's not taught. So then the next piece to that is your relationship with food, and that's the conversation we have in our house as well. It's like it's not necessarily that this food is bad and you need to diet, and this diet culture is like your actual relationship with food is the thing that you need to reevaluate. Not you personally, but all of us. We need to look at it and say, okay, well, you're happy, you celebrate with food. You're sad, you comfort yourself with food. This food's prohibited, and this food, I deserve this food, and something happens, I deserve. So like all these messages all dictate what our relationship with food looks like. And if that's been influenced in one way by your parents, and then you bring it into your life and in your marriage and all those different things, those are the relationships. Much like a toxic friendship, you need to evaluate what that friendship looks like and what that relationship is going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, not even just like family, but like the cultural messaging. So like teen magazines did not
Yes.
do me much good,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of understanding that, like, I I think really where I'm going with this, and I don't think it ever matters why someone is fat,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of kind of healthism and ableism that's rooted in that, and like equating thinness with being healthy,
Hmm.
right? Or looking a certain way with being healthy versus being unhealthy and looking a certain way. It's there's just a lot of it's such a tangled web, right? And
Yes.
like I'm not talking about like my own background with like food and my mom as like, I think sometimes these get like these reasons someone is in a larger body are kind of, or like fat or whatever, they're used as kind of like a justification, which like nobody should ever have to justify like, oh, well, I have this like endocrine problem, which is why like I look the way I do, or like,
Yes.
nobody should ever have to justify that, because it like
Hmm.
unless, especially for us as like movement teachers, like it legitimately doesn't matter unless there's like something about whatever medical condition they have like
Right.
contraindicate an exercise,
Hmm.
and like that's it. And I think that when we think about Pilates and like the role of health and the role and like being a teacher and what our role is,
Hmm.
we do really need to spend a lot of time examining how we may be perpetuating
Yes.
weight bias, or how we may be going outside of our scope of practice
Yes.
in our assumption that someone who's in a larger body wants to be in a smaller body, or and
That's a
like
good,
and
yeah.
telling them how to eat, or like,
Hmm.
whatever, which that's one of my biggest, like, I understand as Pilates teachers, like our income, like, I don't know, like, I don't know
Yeah.
how much people think Pilates teachers make, but there's a lot of like side hustle going on where you're like, try this essential oil, it will help you not be hungry, or where you just like offer,
Yes.
you're like, you sometimes there's conflicts of interest there, right?
Well,
And
actually, Elsa, I have a question for you along those lines, though. The with that culture, one of the things that gets lost in this is simply what people's goals are in coming into the room.
yes, if so, this happened. I call it, like, I'm going to talk about this in my webinar too. Like, there's
Sure.
so many things
This
I
is a
talk about.
great teaser for, no pun
Yeah,
intended, for
I'm,
your.
I'm call,
For,
it is like, my husband was like, what did he say? He was like, don't give away all your secrets. And I'm like, it's not a secret, right? Like, it's not, nothing I'm talking about is a secret.
Yeah.
But I call it, in my webinar, I call it the Adele effect.
Okay.
So I don't know if you remember, the singer Adele.
Yep.
She lost a bunch of weight recently. And earlier on, when she started losing weight, I believe her Pilates instructor, her personal trainer, had done an interview, and they're like, "Oh, she does a lot of Pilates." And so people were coming in to my class, and they're like, "So like Adele did Pilates," or like
Yes.
and like if someone comes into I encourage, like I said, I encourage autonomy. So if someone comes to me and they're in a larger body and they say like, yes, I am in a larger body, I want to lose weight or whatever, I would probably honestly say, well, you may or you may not, because it's Pilates. But what you may find is a greater connection to yourself.
Yes.
And understanding yourself. And
Right.
maybe that will lead to weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't teach weight loss, right? Like
Right.
I can't, like, how do you, when it depends on someone's like metabolism, when it depends on so many other factors, it's 100% outside of my scope of practice, like to coach someone on weight loss. And so I can refer them. I can say like, hey, maybe you should see a registered dietitian. Like, but I'm not going to, we're not meant, if we go by our professional organization's scope of practice, which I adhere to, regardless of how I feel about that professional organization, if we go by their standards, we're not meant to be offering advice or telling people we can help them look a certain way or feel a certain way or get like these results.
Yes. Right.
And I mean, I honor the goal, but assuming the goal, that's just like not a great thing to do unless someone explicitly says like, hey, this is my goal.
Right.
And I think there's just a lot of the assumption I think hurts the most, because because what that assumption says to me is, depending on the body of the trainer as well, it's like, but it's almost like, well, I'm in this line of business and I've worked this hard in my life. I go to the gym, I do these things so that I don't look like you. So I don't get fat.
Yes.
So I am not fat, right? And that's the assumption, right? There's this like, this kind of social idea of like the good fatty.
Yes.
Where it's like, oh, I'm counting my calories. Like, it's like virtue signaling. I'm counting my calories. I'm like, I'm going to the gym. I'm like going on walks. I'm like broadcasting. Like,
your accountability.
Like all of these things I'm doing to be considered socially good.
Well,
in my body.
You know what that makes me think of, Allison? Like when I was going through my divorce, and I'm telling people, okay, we're at this point where we're deciding to split up. And then it's like, well, did you guys go to counseling? Yes. You know, in the church thing, well, were you guys praying enough? Yes. Well, did you talk to anybody else? Yes. Did you get help? Yes. Did you? So you feel like you have to satiate every question that's coming. You have to tick every box to justify where you are in your existence. You have to appease everybody with X, Y, and Z. I did this. I checked this box. I counted this calories. I went to this class. I am a member, a lifetime member of Weight Watchers. Like, you mean, like, we feel like we have to appease everyone around us to justify our existence, and that is an exhausting existence to live.
Yeah, the justification. I don't think anyone should have to justify their bodies or their relationships or like why they don't have children or why they have
Mm-hmm.
children
Mm-hmm.
or like the justification. It's like, and I understand we're social, like the social hierarchy, right? Like,
Right.
and
And the
like
moral
kind of like
constructs.
yeah,
Right.
like all of the constructs, like our social, like everything, but we don't owe it to anyone
Mm-hmm.
to talk about like maybe why our relation, like why we're getting divorced, like why we don't have children, and
Mm-hmm.
like not, you don't even owe that to your family,
True.
right? Like you, like if your in-laws, well, like why don't you have kids? And it's like
Mm-hmm.
none of your business. Like
Right.
why we don't have kids? Like it's none of your business, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You wanna talk about this? Like, oh, I'm gonna make some family weddings real uncomfortable when people ask why we don't have kids. Oh, we don't
Mm-hmm.
have kids. Well, why aren't you married?
Right.
Why don't we have kids? Why aren't you married yet? Let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about that. Like,
Right.
and it's you know all of these. I think all of these things are they're really, again, it's all just a tangled web.
It is.
And like, but again, if someone says like, hey, I'm working on weight loss or I want to lose weight, I'm not gonna be like, get out. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, cool.
Yeah.
That's not something, like that's not for me
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right now. But like here are some like again, here are some dietitians or like look into this. And I know different, fitness modalities have different, and different certifications certainly have like different,
Points of emphasis.
we have like points of emphasis and scopes of practice.
Scope of practice.
Yeah, but I was looking recently, so I've been kind of toying around with finding a space, so I'm no longer in my living room, like with my Pilates equipment.
Yes.
And a local gym was like, I didn't even reach out to them. I had seen a space, and then I guess the owner of the space also owned a gym, and they were like, "Oh, we'd love to have you in our gym space." And I was
Mm-hmm.
curious, and I went to the website. Every single female personal trainer slash coach was a weight loss specialist.
Right.
Every single male trainer was like a strength and conditioning specialist. And I read, there were like
Yes.
nine trainers on staff. I read every single bio. None of the female trainers had any certification whatsoever in nutrition.
Right.
One male trainer on staff did,
Mm-hmm.
but that wasn't called out.
Right. So,
What is that?
okay, so can I put on my business hat for a second
Oh,
here?
yeah, go ahead, put on your business hat.
Okay, so now when you see that, do you say run away, or do you say, let me get up in there so I can change this culture and leverage this ignorant culture?
I was like, I don't have the time for this. So I was like, I'm running away but I understand that they are trying to appeal to the general public, and they want they're like, and like the general public is still very much like fat bad, thin good, gym good, not like sitting on couch bad, right?
Yes.
But like I was just like, I don't have the time. I do not have the time in my life right now to move into this space in a gym
Mm-hmm.
and talk and like educate about these sorts of things. And I also don't know that they'd want to hear it.
Right.
because it, like, you have to want to hear it
Mm.
to some extent. Like, you have to want to start thinking about these things.
Okay. So now if the owner was putting that out to you, even though you saw the bio of the people around it, and he's the one who's trying to affect change, would you walk through that open door?
If there was a frank conversation, but like the truth of the matter is, like, I answered, it was like so it was a Craigslist ad for like a 200 square foot like office
Hmm.
space.
That's what
And
I'm in right now. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, like, this looks perfect for me, this is what I'm doing, like, let me know. And then the email back, they're like, oh yeah, well, actually, like, I own this gym,
Hmm.
we have a room, like, if you're interested, like, come on in. And maybe this was my own bias, where I was like, okay, like, how hard up am I for a space right now? Like, and
Yes.
I'm like, I'm being picky. Like, it's
Hmm.
like a real like Goldilocks situation, where I'm like, I'm like,
Okay, real talk. Yes.
yeah, yeah. I'm like, it needs to have like this kind of entrance. It needs to have parking. Like, it needs to, like, I'm like,
Hmm.
it needs this. It needs this. It needs this,
Yeah.
because this, you know. But I was like, okay, like, let me look at the website at least. And I looked at the website, and I was like, and I understand also that, knowing what I know now about like website design and
Hmm.
how, and usually what people will pay for versus not pay for. I
Right,
was
right,
like,
right.
this was probably like some stock
Strategy. Yeah.
template,
Hmm.
right? And they were just
Hmm.
like, we work in fitness. Like, this is a
Hmm.
fitness template, and like,
Right.
this is what our website's gonna look like. Um, but like, I just looked at it, and I was like, I don't think this is for me. And this was maybe 2 months ago.
Hmm.
But like, yeah, if there had been, but they didn't know who I was. They didn't know like my messaging. They were just like, Pilates instructor. Yes, we have gym. Like, let's like put them in. Yeah,
Right, right,
like,
right.
let's use the space. But if there had been a conversation, like, maybe I would have considered it.
Hmm.
Um, but I based on the studios I've worked at,
Hmm.
and like, things I've liked, things I've not liked, and I don't know if anyone else, like, I don't know if I'd ever be happy working for someone else, because I'm
Yeah.
always like, even when I didn't work in fitness, like, I worked
Hmm.
at a restaurant as a hostess, and I was like, why are there typos on the menu? Like, let me,
Yes.
like, give me access to the computer. I'm going to correct this. Like,
Yes.
like, there might be a better way to do this.
Hmm.
You know,
Yep.
I think that even like, I have a pretty clear vision right now of what I want. And I
Jess,
don't,
don't stop, and I are on the same page. I'm like totally sitting on my hands because I'd be like, do it! Like, I would jump all over that. Have those conversations, negotiate with them, say, this is what I'm coming in, this is what your culture needs, this is how you shift the tide, this is how you be a leader in your industry by bringing me in, and we lock arms and we make this happen. If you don't want all that, then have a nice life. But if you do, this is how we start this conversation.
yes. So I struggle a lot with my tone. And like, I don't, I'm like, how do I even start that conversation without like, I'm always like, okay, I'm a very blunt person, and I'm like, I've
Yeah.
had to work a lot on, like, I don't know what to call it,
Yes.
like, digest, like, being
Tact.
someone, like, tact. I like being like easily digestible, and like,
Yes.
but I've had to work a lot on tact.
Hey,
And
Tara signed up for the webinar, by the
oh,
way.
oh, thank you, Tara.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, like, I think that there was no way where I could respond to this Craigslist email,
Mm.
especially an email. Like, an in-person conversation would be
Have a
one
phone
thing,
call. Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
totally.
an email. If I were like, yeah, so,
Yeah.
I would love to consider it, but I'm not sure if your gym is a good fit for me because of XYZ. Like, let's
You're
talk
not,
about it.
yeah, exactly. You're not sure till you have the conversation.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I can do this right now and do
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
appropriately. And then, like,
Yes.
there's so much to consider. And like, I'm
Let's continue that conversation because I really that is the model that I have here that I started in July. It's 200 square foot space in a gym. It's a micro business model. But it had to start with us being on the same page from a vision perspective, Andrew and I, and we work great together. And there's times we butt heads on things, but we're both fighting for the same thing. So we land at a place where we continue to move forward. And
Yeah.
it's a great working relationship. I was saying to my wife for the weekend, like there's things that we've duked it out over, and we've had to land at, okay, well, we're both really passionate about helping people. That's why I'm fighting for this and you're fighting for that, and we agree and we move forward, right? So it can be done. And like I think like Jess's comments there, like this idea that you need to watch your tone isn't necessarily true. You can speak from passion unapologetically speak with passion on the thing that you're passionate about, and present that and be that, and that's who you are. And yeah, be blunt. Yeah. So I mean, and actually, can I say something else too? What you're saying, like your husband was saying, like don't give everything away that's going to be in your workshop. I believe that you can give everything away in this conversation, and people will still go because you present it much like a Pilates class. What you're presenting, the way you're presenting it, is not the way that I would present it. So if I had your transcript and did your workshop, it wouldn't have the same impact as if you did it. You are so unique and you're so special and you're so gifted. You could have recited your whole workshop today and it would still have value for someone who's paying for it on the 12th.
Yeah, you know, I think that the Pilates industry, controversial opinion, I think that a lot of things, and I've had this conversation with Michelle where it's like, oh yeah, I do have enough material
Yes.
for like 4 more workshops. Yeah,
Yes.
Michelle sat through my first practice run,
Mm-hmm.
and like I got really, everyone in the first practice run gave me really good feedback, and then I had a second practice run and then I got really good feedback, and now
Yes.
I'm like splitting it somewhere between the middle where I'm like, okay, we need to like tone it down from like
Mm-hmm.
this heavy hitting. I'm like, okay, we were here, like, so like I should probably be here, like let's meet in the middle. But yeah, I could talk. It's like it's because it's such a rich, it's like, especially for someone who's like never even heard the terms diet culture,
Mm-hmm.
like I hope people are like, I really hope people take something from it, because I don't,
Yes.
and I'm not trying to like, someone might say, well, this isn't like a good sales tactic, but when it comes to larger bodies on the Pilates equipment, I'm gonna guess an experienced teacher already is like gonna be like, oh yeah, this is how I do this. This is what works for my clients.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I really think the value in what I'm presenting is that like, we're like, hey, let's talk about the BMI. Let's talk about the
Yes.
terms obese and overweight. Like,
Yes.
let's talk about privilege. Because when I've seen this information presented in a Pilates sphere, and I'm not saying, okay, oof, getting all fired up. I like, you,
Go for
when
it.
you can, I think that you can be in a, I'll use the term straight size body,
Mm-hmm.
and you can educate people on teaching Pilates to larger bodies, right?
Okay. Okay.
But if you are perpetuating biases
Mm-hmm.
and you are not taking a health at, if you're not even mentioning health at every size and the HACE informed approach to movement and medicine and health, and if you're referencing people in larger bodies, if you're talking about that and you're like saying, well, maybe like, maybe walking across the parking lot to go grocery shopping for them is their exercise versus me running a 10K or whatever.
That language.
Like that language is just like so, it's
Destructive.
like repulsive and destructive,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just perpetuating bias. If you're like, well, they're eating chicken and french fries, fried chicken and french fries, like, one, fried chicken and french fries are delicious. Like, I'm sorry, it's not a food you enjoy clearly, and you think it makes people fat, right? Like, you know, I really wouldn't. I think historically, right, in the Pilates industry, we uphold people as experts,
Right.
for better or for worse, based on the number of years they have been teaching
Mm-hmm.
and what we perceive to be their skill level. And again, I'm not saying that like they're not able to competently teach
Mm-hmm.
other people in larger bodies. But when
Right.
they're not considering, when they're not even looking at the social movements that have been going on, and they're upholding like kind of the narrative of like
Yes.
diet culture and like, you know, maybe people want to lose weight, like that's just not a good look.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good look. And I think that especially in terms of Pilates, like someone said, we put them on a pedestal. We do put people on a pedestal, and
Absolutely.
we charge so much for like continuing education. We charge so much, and like I think like I do post like free things on my Instagram channel, you know, where it's like, hey, you might not be aware this is an issue, but like here it is. Like here's like
Yes.
my sub 5 minute video on like making this more comfortable for someone.
Right.
Because I really do believe this information should have been included in teacher training
Mm-hmm.
from a non-biased perspective. Because
Absolutely.
when you're teaching, when so my teacher training, and I know some teacher trainings talk about it, but I learned about working with pregnant bodies, pregnant people. I
Okay.
learned about working with seniors. That information was not presented with bias. There wasn't ageism associated with it. You
Right.
know, like,
Right.
and I learned about working with, you know, people with injuries. But nowhere in my teacher training manual was it like, hey, if like try a heavier spring load for someone in a larger body because of like physics and like support, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that should be free information. And I don't,
Right.
you know, I
Absolutely.
don't really care if I'm giving they're not, it's not secrets, right? Like it needs to
No.
be out there.
I
It
love
needs to
well,
be
you're speaking
included.
from passion, right? You're speaking from your place of passion. And I do the same thing, and many of us on the stride do the same thing, and that's fine. Like, that is totally fine, and you'll be compensated for that eventually. But more important thing is that the message is out, and people have a heightened awareness of what is, what's happening in our industry. And like Marimba said, like it's not a fitness industry; it's a wellness industry.
The I read this really interesting article recently about kind of like the 2010s and the I don't think they called it this, but it was like the goopification of like wellness and what
Okay.
like Gwyneth Paltrow, like our perceptions of wellness
Hmm.
and how wellness, and this also I think had to do with like, and it, like, it's just these interesting articles I've been reading for a while. And then there was another one about like Jennifer Lopez and her like beauty line. And like, she's like, well,
Right.
I've never had Botox. And it's like, okay, maybe you never had Botox and you have flawless skin, but can we acknowledge that you have like a staff and like like
Right.
maybe like right like maybe that's contributed to your glowing complexion, like
Right.
sure. Right, like yeah, you wear sunscreen, but like you can also get like facials like every week, you know, like
Right.
your financial privilege has like allowed this. And it's the same with like Goop and like Gwyneth Paltrow and this concept of wellness. So,
Hmm.
and like I'm not here to take the woman down necessarily, but it like I seen some things that made me laugh where she's like, it's like, oh yeah, I drink this water, or like toxin this, toxin that, like
Right.
Botox in my face, or whatever
Hmm.
the other Botox that she's shilling now, right? And like, I think wellness right now is not wellness. And
Hmm.
it's true, Nikki just said their looks are a full-time job. Yeah,
Yes.
like their bodies are their job, their face, their skin, it is their job, period. But wellness as it stands right now is external.
You're right.
And I understand that, right? Because just as much as we like to compartmentalize, like, and we like to categorize people, like, I'm sure there's some like sociological component, right? Where we talk
Hmm.
about like what makes a like an ideal figure, like what, like when we're like, what's the golden ratio of proportions? Renaissance artists were talking about this, right?
Yes.
Like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
they
Right.
are like
Exactly.
in their
It's
art,
just
like
right.
it's what we're attracted, or like what on a level where we might not even know it appeals to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, when you have flawless skin, or when your brows are like,
Mm-hmm.
your eyebrows are just like the picture of like, you're like, look at those eyebrows, look at the
Yes.
thickness of their hair, look at their shine, you know, like when you look at these things and you equate them with wellness and like the external with wellness,
Mm-hmm.
but leave the internal out of it, like I think we can all admit that that's not necessarily wellness. That's also capitalism and consumerism.
For sure.
um, and the very interesting thing about Pilates and this idea of wellness is I think we don't know who, so teachers might know who we are as an industry,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to an extent, we know,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have to play this game for longevity
Yes.
and for money, where we're like kind of selling wellness. And so I
Right.
want to, so Helen just said there's a lot of internal wellness now, meditation and mindfulness. And yes, that's
Yeah.
true. But
That's true. Yeah.
who, there's also a lot of privilege tied up in meditation and mindfulness, and who has time and like self-care, like rituals, and like, you know, like, and what is like self-care, and like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing, like, is, and right now I'd say that like, yes, internal wellness is on the rise, but
Right.
how does that affect someone, especially like right now during COVID? How are people with children being affected? And like, if they're not able to have a moment where they can commit to their wellness and meditation and mindfulness because they're having to worry about like,
Food insecurity, for
about
example.
food insecurity, yeah, like food insecurity, and they're having to worry about like their kids' access to distance learning. And like,
Yes. Right.
you know, I think wellness disproportionately, this focus on wellness disproportionately impacts women, just like COVID is kind of like disproportionately affecting working mothers.
Yeah.
um and their access to things, and like
Yes.
we, it's just something I don't necessarily see acknowledged in the Pilates space, where we charge so damn much. Like it's just so much money.
Yeah.
And we talk about you know, Michelle talks about how much Pilates costs and access
Right.
to Pilates, and it's
Access.
true. It's true. Okay, so I want to address what Jess said about like
Mm-hmm.
that's an excuse. Internal wellness is not only for people with privilege. It takes a moment and the desire. Yes, it takes a
Mm-hmm.
moment and the desire. And I feel like in some ways kind of like hypocritical, like knowing my own privilege
Mm-hmm.
and saying like, well, people might not have access, like people who like with kids or whatever, they might not have the privilege for this. Yeah, it takes privilege, like or it takes privilege, and it also takes, but it also takes desire, because you, like I was a no pair, I was a nanny,
Mm-hmm.
and those kids weren't my own, but oh, I don't know how parents are hanging in there, because
Yeah.
like at the, like from 7 a.m. to like whenever the parents got home for dinner, like 6 p.m., like that was my day, but I could clock out. I was
Right.
like, cool, I'm going for a bike ride now. Like, goodbye. And
Mm-hmm.
like my weekends were my own. And I didn't have to
Privilege.
be, yeah, that's privilege. I did not
Yes.
have to be a caregiver.
Right.
But like also the parents being able to afford an
Mm-hmm.
au pair was privilege.
Right.
Right. And I don't know, like it's just such a messy conversation. And yeah, like
Yeah.
self-care and doing the meditation and the mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
it it's a low, it probably has like the lowest barrier to entry out of like all of
Everything.
wellness.
Right.
But there's still, I think there's still, depending on your like family situation,
Yeah.
like do you participate in the gig economy? Like are you an Uber and a Lyft driver and you're also like driving for like DoorDash
Mm-hmm.
and like Grubhub, and
Mm-hmm.
like, do you have time? Do you have time for wellness? Like if you're sleeping in
That's
your
exactly it.
car,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah, it is our speeches.
it is a joke. And honestly, too, like my my little piece that I said at the beginning about us being the authority on these things is also key. I love your thoughtfulness around all of these concepts, and they're very considerate of every angle and every person's experience as we look to being mindful of our bias
Yeah,
in every situation. And that's key. It's also paralyzing if we're to stop there and just keep analyzing it and making sure that we're covering every angle, because then all we're doing is pleasing people again.
yeah, you cannot please everyone, and you cannot be inclusive or accessible to everyone
To everyone.
as much as you want to be. And in terms, like, I guess people who are like sitting here like, let's talk about the weight bias, let's talk about Pilates, let's go, right? Like you yeah, like I can advocate for the inclusion of larger bodies in the Pilates industry, but the weight limit on equipment is super real.
Yes.
So if someone's over 350 pounds, I can't like I cannot serve them on my reformer,
Right.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
even though until very recently
Mm-hmm.
that same weight limit was 400 pounds, but it's just changed
Mm-hmm.
because probably lawyers have gotten involved, right? And
Right.
like
Right.
you're like, oh, let's like we don't actually know, so we better like err on the side of caution
Caution.
and
Right.
drop the weight limits, right? So like we can serve, like especially in the terms of Pilates and weight bias and accessibility to larger bodies, we can serve larger bodies to a point, but
Mm-hmm.
there's still going to be that exclusion, especially on the equipment
Mm-hmm.
of people in larger bodies. So like
Well,
where does it stop?
yes, that's exactly it. And I was going to say that earlier. That comes down to our full circle, my competence bias. If you are competent in your job, if you're confident in the way that you present as a teacher, you maybe at some point have been taught that I can take someone somewhere else in the work for them to experience that movement, experience that feel in their body, all those different things. And if we get stuck in this, this circling drain, like Nikki said, of trying to address and accommodate all people at all times and think of all these different things, we get nowhere. But one, we have to recognize, what our competencies are, and know that we have permission to add a spring so that someone can understand the movement. Know that we have permission to take them somewhere else in the work, studying the work, so we can bring them somewhere else so they can see and feel this or whatever it is. And then the other part to that too is competency circling. I lost my third point, but but I think that's all tied into that, is that we need to understand that we have the skills, the tools, and the permission to give people that experience. And we can't, this is it, niches. Understand also what we're passionate about and what our niche is. So I'm giving you space and amplifying your voice as an expert in that area. And I have my own separate areas of expertise, and we need to work together to ensure that collectively people are moving and not being trapped by someone else's bias. And then my third point to that is just being the authority on these things. So if someone is saying that this is how it's done, or like, that gym example of everyone has a weight loss expertise, and whether you want to step in there or not, I think that we need to rise up in our authority and say, like, this is how it's going to be done moving forward. This is what this means now. This is no longer tolerable because this is the reality of how things are. This is what needs to happen in our teacher training programs. These are the gaps. These are opportunities to grow. And we're not going to tolerate these things being taught with bias, or these things not being taught at all. And, and those are all the things that, like, okay, so now that we have an awareness of what our biases are and all those different things, we're moving from the so what to the now what.
That's a really good way to put it. Like I hope people, when I point out the gaps in in like knowledge and the gaps in teacher training, I never want people to feel shamed for it or attacked by it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do it, it's because I want to see change.
Yes.
Right? Like I want to see change, like 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like even just talking about like I don't care if you're like I don't care if your training is like this, you know, I don't care what your training is like or what type of equipment you use, but like even talking about equipment dimensions in teacher training, like
Yes.
looping back to the thing I started talking about at the beginning before I started talking about how I accidentally hurt my husband, like my friend Jen, like, you know, I had this used reformer.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it. And I thought I was like, cool. It's the same manufacturers. The equipment I was trained on. It's just different model.
Right.
I didn't even know carriage dimensions were like really a thing.
Mm.
And I have her on my reformer, and I'm like, what? Right? Like the first time I watched her get on the reformer, and like, yeah, fresh teacher or whatever, I was like, what's going? Like, why is this happening?
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And it was like IQ how to get, I IQ'd her how to get on the reformer because that's important. Like, honest, like don't not tell someone how to get on there because like it's not. Sometimes it's, depending on your body composition, is not as simple as lay down.
Yes.
Right. Like it's just not. And I can't remember what spring load I had on the first time. I think it was like a lighter spring load when I had her lay down for footwork, and then I was going to put the springs on, and then the carriage was like shifting wildly, and I was like, okay. Mm-hmm. The next time she came, I put on more springs.
Yes.
But like the foot bar was in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay. The third time she came, I had all the springs on. I dropped the foot bar down.
Right.
And like it's just like.
But I think that's what Jess is saying there too. Like we know what we know, and we're learning. And I think that those examples are why we need grace in this work, right? So we can make those mistakes. We can hurt our husbands and move on, and continue to still get better, right?
Yeah, well, we do need the grace, like, right? And that's why, like, I really do say, like, I don't want to shame anyone because it's like,
yeah, I hear that.
I've been on the receiving end, and I also probably dealt it out, right? Mm-hmm. Because, like, I know I can actually think of one super specific example where I said something snippy to another instructor, and I was like now I'm like,
ooh, yes,
I said that, like, I was such like
with your outside voice.
With my outside voice.
Right.
Like I can't remember what I was cueing, but I was like, yeah, keep your heels on the foot bar. Like the foot bar, I think it was, I can't even remember, but I was like, keep your heels on the foot bar. And she's like, oh, that's so much harder. And she was in my class. She had taken my group class that day. And she was like, oh, that's so much harder. I was like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. And then, you know what I mean? And then, like, in retrospect, I'm like,
yeah, guilty as charged, like, right?
I'm that person now, right?
For sure, yeah.
But I've also been on the receiving end of that, and I think that we need to just try to be outside of like just kind of the hippiness of it all. Like, I think we just need to like advocate for each other and be like gentle with each other, especially when it comes to like confronting bias, because like you know what you know. And if you don't know that you've been walking through your life with like thin privilege or any sort of privilege.
Any privilege.
Yeah, and if you've never been in a larger body and you don't even know anyone, right, who's in a larger body, or like or you have that one friend who was fat, but then she went on a super restrictive diet and like she looks like everyone else. Like, you don't know. Like, even if you've had a sibling or whatever who's been in a larger body, like I think it's just hard to find that ability to relate because, and this goes back to what I said earlier, like, well, you've been working so hard to not look like me.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And I think that we just need to understand, like, because I was there, like, and there are days where I still struggle with internalized weight bias, right? Or like just my feelings with myself. And I think that we just need to understand it's a different mindset, and
Yes, absolutely.
it's it's not good, you know, like it's not bad. It's just another way of looking at things.
Yes.
And like maybe I'll never know what it's like to have like different, like I'll never know what it's like to have different life experiences. Like I don't know, even though, so one thing I want to talk about is that my husband is Vietnamese
Okay.
American, right?
Yep.
And so I've watched I've watched him kind of navigate very in like for the past 9 years, like navigate culture,
Yes.
navigate family,
Hmm.
navigate what it means to be like an Asian man in America.
Right. Right.
And even though I've watched it, I'll never know, and we've talked about it, like I'll never know
Hmm.
100% what it's been like for him and what it's felt like for him.
Yes.
And it, no matter how much we talk about it, it's not going to change. Like,
Right.
you know, that lack of experience that all have had with it. But
Right.
it's like, you can, there's probably something you can relate to it,
Yes.
right? To like humanize it.
Right. There's a phrase. We have about 5 minutes left here. There's a phrase that a friend of mine used when we are talking about this whole notion of bias and inclusion and accessibility, and we didn't touch on it at all. And simply making things inviting. And in our space, in our teaching, can we make it inviting, even if we're not well versed in biases and the way like inclusive language and all these different things? I've always said this as a personal trainer. First, I celebrate progress. You did 185 pounds on the bench press. You did 190 this week. Good for you. You did 5 pounds on your front side raise. You're doing 8 pounds now. Great. So we're celebrating small progress. If we have an air, an atmosphere, an environment of that is inviting, and we're willing to learn from our mistakes, we're willing to ask questions and not start with assumptions, I think we'll land in the right place if we simply make our space inviting.
Yeah, not starting with the assumptions is huge. Like going back to like that assumption, like, well, maybe they want to lose weight because I don't, you know, I wouldn't want to look like that, right?
Yes, yes.
And I think that the Pilates industry, like going back to what was said at the very beginning by Nikki, like, yeah, we're a little behind, but we're a small industry, so the conversations like just like take off.
Yes.
I think that as as much as these conversations have maybe been like a little uncomfortable for people, like I think as long as you're teaching in an inviting way, it's you're probably not going to do anything like, you know, like
Yes. You won't
don't
do
worry
things
about like,
from a
yeah,
mean-spirited place.
yeah, don't worry about like misspeaking, like as long as you're not like intentionally like being a jerk, like don't worry about it. And I think that,
My AirPods actually died. That's why
oh
I
yeah,
had to take them
oh
off.
yeah,
That's
I don't know, my phone's like, I charge my phone. Sometimes I don't charge my phone before I go to bed, but I was like charging my phone.
yeah, yeah.
I think that the thing to consider is that like if you're not trying to, if you're not intentionally being a jerk, then you're like probably doing okay. But
That's
the
quotable right there.
yeah, if you're not, yeah, someone put that on a shirt.
Yeah.
But I think in the Pilates industry, we do like to say like, and I've had this when I posted in forums, like, well, I don't see fat. I just teach the person, I teach the body in front of me. But it's like, you, if you don't understand like how your own bias is informing how you teach the body in front of them, like you might not, you might say like, oh, I don't see it. And that's great. But are you sure you don't see it?
Right.
Because you have to see it and acknowledge it in order to make someone more comfortable on the reformer.
Yes.
Like you have to see it and acknowledge it to make someone more comfortable. You just do. And I think we like to be all like lofty, and we're like that phrase, teach the body in front of you. I'm just like, oh, okay. Like
Yeah,
what a beautiful generality.
Right. Yeah.
So
yes, Jess, it is like I don't see color. Exact same things. Like no, see it, deal with it, address it, and welcome it, and make your pivots. Right. So
yeah, like acknowledge the human being.
yes.
Teach to the human, right? Like, did someone have if someone had a terrible PE experience, like, and you find out about it, that's gonna have to inform how you teach them.
Yes.
Right? If you're the type, and like maybe they won't even work with you, like they'll work with you once, but if you're the type of instructor who's like, let's go, come on, like, like, and they had like such a traumatizing experience in their youth.
Yep.
Like it's gonna impact how you have to,
Absolutely.
if you want to retain that relationship with them, it's going to have to impact and affect how you teach them.
Yep.
So I don't know, this was such a good conversation. Like I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad it worked out, like being here. And
Honestly.
I hope people, if there's anything that's taken away from this, it's like basically don't feel ashamed for not knowing how to teach with someone in a larger body, because your teacher training probably, like mine, didn't talk about it, or if it did, it was still informed by bias. Like, and I think so much of it comes from also us wanting to be the authority.
Yes.
And like, you're not in neutral pelvis. Like lift your leg half a centimeter higher, and like you're gonna feel the work more. Versus saying like, do you feel your pelvis moving when you do this? Like, what do you feel in your body?
Right.
Like, but I mean, I know some people don't respond well to that kind of teaching. That's fine.
Well,
But
yeah,
you can't be for everyone.
You can't be for everybody, but I mean,
Yeah.
overall, this everybody sign up for Allison's workshop. If the 2 hours that we just did wasn't enough of a teaser to show that she is an authority on this and she's killing it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like honestly, this has been so good. Thank you so much for your time. Really,
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
This was, every time I watch, I don't always get it. Like, I have a hard time, like, chilling and just, like, listening and sitting and watching. And I understand it's a big ask for someone to make it for, like, 2 hours of a conversation.
Right.
But to everyone who, like, stuck around and listened, thank you. And I hope you got something from it. And then I always encourage people to, like, just shoot me a DM. Although those are getting a little overwhelming, but like you can shoot me a DM, you can email me, might be better at this point. And I'm always happy to like take a sec and like just pause and try to answer a question someone might have, because that you have to ask.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And I have to say it too, like you are a voice that this generation needs.
Oh, thank you.
You really are. And I just want to acknowledge that and keep doing what you're doing and keep being that voice. Like I'm cheering for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's scary, but it's like, putting yourself out there, but
yep.
I'm thank you. That's really affirming to hear that. So thank you very much. And I hope you have a good rest of your, I guess, what is it like now, afternoon for you?
Afternoon. Yes.
Yeah, it is now noon. So I hope you have a good rest of your Monday. And
so much.
Yeah. And don't be a stranger. Like you can let's have chats anytime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
All right. Yeah. Well, have a good one, everybody, and
Thanks
have a good rest of your day. Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.